ever find a missing persons poster and recognize the face, but the name is wrong? Do not go looking for answers alone. I did. And the person I went with isn't the person who came back out. Every college campus has one of those places. You know the kind I mean. The building, or the floor, or the wing that upperclassmen mention in passing and then change the subject. At my school, it was the east wing of Hollis Hall, a red brick dormitory built in the 1950s. The kind of building that looks perfectly normal until you notice one wing has plywood over its windows, and its own name never shows up on the housing tour. I'm going to call my friend Marcus, because even now, I'm careful about using his real name out loud. We were both sophomores, both broke, both the kind of guys who thought we shouldn't was basically an invitation. Marcus had heard the story from his RA, third hand, the way these things always travel. A student named Daniel Cho had lived in the East Wing back in 1998, and one night in October, he just stopped existing. No note, no body, no trace. The university closed the wing the following semester and never reopened it. Officially, it was structural remediation. Unofficially, everyone just called it the sealed wing. We had a key because Marcus's cousin had worked maintenance the summer before and never turned his master key back in. I want that detail on the record because it's the only part of this story that has a boring, mundane explanation. Nothing else does. We went in on a Thursday in November, a little after midnight, because Thursday nights nobody's awake enough to notice two guys with backpacks and flashlights disappearing around the side of a building. The door groaned open into a stairwell that smelled like standing water and old carpet glue, and the second we stepped inside, both our flashlights flickered. At the exact same time. Not close, exact. Same half-second stutter, same rhythm, like they were wired to the same switch, except they weren't wired to anything. Marcus laughed it off, said something about old buildings having bad electromagnetic fields, cheap batteries, whatever. I laughed too. I want to be honest that I laughed too, because in the moment it felt stupid to be scared of a flashlight. We started down the hallway. Every door we tried, and there were maybe a dozen dorm rooms on that floor, was already unlocked. Not broken, not forced, unlocked, like someone had gone room to room ahead of us and turned every deadbolt, and then left them that way for 26 years, waiting. We found Daniel's room by accident. There was no room number on the door. It had fallen off at some point, leaving 4 rust-stained screw holes in a rectangle. But something about the hallway made both of us stop in front of it without either of us saying anything. Marcus pushed it open. I need you to understand what a time capsule looks like when it hasn't been touched by human hands, only by decades of dust. The room was exactly the way you'd expect a 1998 dorm room to look. A 9-inch nails poster half peeled off the wall, a boxy CRT monitor with a thick layer of gray dust like a blanket, a mini fridge with a Blink 182 sticker on it. The bed was still made. There was a mug on the desk with the dried brown ring of coffee still visible at the bottom, 26 years old. And there was a diary, spiral-bound, the kind you'd buy for $1 at the campus bookstore, sitting open on the desk like Daniel had just stepped away to answer a phone call. The last entry was dated October 14th, 1998. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but the last line, the one that made both of us go quiet, said, "Someone's been standing outside my door every night at 2 a.m. Tonight I'm going to open it and ask them why." It just stopped there, midword, mid-thought, like the pen had been lifted off the page and never came back down. Neither of us said anything for a solid 30 seconds. Marcus finally broke the silence with a joke, something like, "Well, that's not ominous at all," and his voice cracked a little on the word ominous, which told me he wasn't as calm as he was pretending to be. Me neither, honestly. My hands were sweating enough that my flashlight kept slipping in my grip. We were about to leave. I want that on the record too. We had decided, without really deciding out loud, that we'd seen enough, that this was a good story for the group chat and not something worth pushing further. And then, from somewhere down the empty hallway behind us, a voice, quiet, flat, almost bored, finished the sentence. While they wanted. Same cadence as the handwriting looked like it would sound. Same unfinished shape, completed. There was no one in that hallway. We checked. We checked every single room, flashlights shaking, and there was nothing there but dust and old furniture and our own too loud breathing. If the idea of your own house finishing a stranger's sentence from 26 years ago sends something cold down your spine, you already know what to do before this video ends. We left after that. Ran, honestly, down 4 flights of stairs, out into the parking lot, gulping November air like we'd been underwater. We sat in Marcus's car for almost 20 minutes without either of us starting the engine, just staring at the building, at that one plywood-covered window on the 3rd floor that I was suddenly very sure hadn't been plywood-covered an hour earlier. Marcus pulled out his phone to check the time. It was 2:47 a.m., and sitting right there in his camera roll, at the very top, time-stamped an hour earlier, during the exact stretch of time we'd been standing frozen in that dorm room, was a photo neither of us had taken. It was me, asleep, in my own bed, in my own apartment across town, blanket pulled up to my chin, taken from an angle that would have required someone standing directly over me. Marcus's phone had been in his pocket the entire time. He showed me. No deleted apps, no remote access, nothing. Just a photo that shouldn't exist, of me somewhere I hadn't been yet, at a time I could prove, later, that I was still standing in that hallway. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the lights on and sat up staring at my own bedroom door until sunrise. I want to tell you the part that actually broke something in me, and it isn't the diary, and it isn't the photo. It's what I found 3 days later, when I couldn't let it go and went digging through the university's digitized newspaper archive for anything about Daniel Cho. The archive had a scanned copy of the original missing person flyer from November 1998, the kind that used to get stapled to bulletin boards, black and white, a little blurry from the photocopier. Daniel Cho, age 19, last seen October 14th. If you have any information, contact Campus Safety. Case hashtag 98-1147. The photo on the flyer was Marcus, not someone who looked like him, not a coincidence of bone structure. It was his face, older, thinner, the hairline receded the way it might in 26 extra years he hadn't lived yet, but unmistakably, down to the small scar above his left eyebrow that he got falling off his bike at 9 years old, his face. I haven't shown him the flyer. I don't know if I ever will. Marcus stopped talking about that night almost immediately. Doesn't like to talk about it. I mean, he genuinely stopped talking, for the most part, about anything. He dropped 2 classes that semester. He started keeping his blinds shut, day and night, in a dorm room on the opposite side of campus from Hollis Hall. When I asked him once, carefully, if he remembered the diary, he looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, and said, "What diary?" He doesn't remember going in. I do. I have the photos on my own phone to prove we were there, time-stamped, geotagged, the plywood window in the background. When I showed them to him, he went pale and asked me, very quietly, to never bring it up again. I looked up case hashtag 98-1147 once, through a public records request the university's alumni office pointed me to, just to see if I was losing my mind. The case file exists. It's still open. Daniel Cho was never found. But here's the detail I can't get past, the one I haven't told anyone until now. According to that same case file, Daniel Cho was reported missing by his roommate. The roommate's name, typed plainly in the intake report, was Marcus. Has anyone else ever found their own face, or a friend's, somewhere it had no business being, years before it should have existed? I need to know I'm not the only one. Tell me in the comments. The photo on the missing person flyer from 1998 was my best friend's face. Aged 26 years, he hadn't lived yet. He hasn't said a word about any of it since, and I've stopped asking him where he actually was that year. Before you keep watching, If you ever find your own name already written somewhere you've never been, don't read it out loud. I did, and I don't think I've finished paying for that yet. I need to say up front, I'm not a believer in ghosts. I wasn't then, and some stubborn part of me still isn't now, even after everything. I'm an electrician by trade. I fix things. I like problems that have wires in them, because wires either work or they don't, and there's always a reason why. This isn't going to have a reason. That's what still keeps me up. It was February of last year. I'd been laid off in October. Unemployment was drying up, and my landlord had stopped pretending to be patient about the rent. So when a staffing agency called me about a facilities security position, nights only, cash adjacent pay, minimal interaction, I didn't ask a lot of questions. I should have. The place was Ashcombe Hall. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. It's not famous the way the big estates are. It was built in the 1820s by a shipping family who bankrupted themselves trying to out-decorate actual royalty, got sold off twice, used as a military convalescent home during the war, and eventually turned into a heritage museum in the 80s. It closed to the public for years before I got there. Budget cuts, structural concerns. The official reason kept changing depending on who you asked, which, in hindsight, should have told me something. My job was simple. Walk the halls twice a night, check that nothing had been disturbed, log the boiler temperature, lock up. 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Alone, 5 nights a week. The agency guy handed me a keyring the size of my fist and a laminated map and said, "You won't see another living soul in there. That's kind of the point." I laughed. He didn't. The first 2 weeks were, honestly, kind of peaceful. I liked the quiet. I liked that nobody needed anything from me. The hall was beautiful in the way old, sad things are beautiful. High ceilings gone soft with water damage. Chandeliers wrapped in plastic sheeting like they were embarrassed to be seen. Portraits with brass nameplates nobody had polished in a decade. Every piece of furniture that hadn't been moved into storage was under white dust sheets, and at night, under my flashlight, they looked less like furniture and more like a room full of people standing very still, waiting for something. I want you to picture the smell, because the smell is where it actually started for me, before the sounds, before anything visual. Old buildings have a smell. Damp stone, dry rot, the particular mustiness of 150 years of nobody opening the windows enough. I got used to that in the first few days, but there was another smell underneath it. Wax. Specifically, the smell of a candle that had just been blown out. That warm, smoky, tallow smell you get in the half second after the flame dies. I noticed it first in the long gallery, on maybe night 4. I stood there with my flashlight sweeping across 40 feet of empty hardwood, absolutely certain that somewhere close to me, a candle had just gone out. There were no candles in the building. Fire code. Everything was LED, battery run, or hardwired. I checked. I actually radioed the agency about it the next morning, half convinced there was a gas leak doing something to my sense of smell. They said maintenance would look into it. Maintenance never called back. At 3:13 on the 14th night, I was standing directly under the sensor when it tripped. Nothing moved. I was the only thing in the room. The alarm just went off, right above my head, for no reason at all, in a room I could see every corner of. That was the first night I didn't finish my second walkthrough. I sat in the security booth by the front doors until sunrise with all the lights on that I was allowed to turn on, and I told myself it was a wiring fault. I am, after all, an electrician. I know a bad relay when I hear one lying to me. Here's the part where it stopped being about sensors. I did the portraits every night as part of my rounds, not moving them, just checking they were still hung straight, still where they were supposed to be, per the inventory sheet the museum kept taped inside the security booth door. Room by room, name by name. The hall had probably 60 of these things, family members and governors, and one very unfortunate-looking admiral, going back 200 years. On night 17, I noticed a portrait in the west corridor was hanging slightly crooked. Small thing. I straightened it, logged it, moved on. Building settling, I told myself. Old houses shift. On night 18, 3 portraits were crooked, and not in the way gravity crooked things. They were rotated, like someone had turned them a few degrees, and then walked away. I straightened all 3. I remember standing there afterward for a long moment, looking down the corridor at 60 painted faces, all of them facing forward the way I'd left them, and feeling, for the first time since I'd started the job, genuinely watched. On night 19, every portrait in the building had been rearranged. Not just crooked, swapped. The Admiral was hanging where the shipping family's matriarch used to be. A child's portrait from the nursery wing was now down in the servants' hall. I checked this against the inventory sheet with my hands actually shaking because there was no version of this that made sense. I was alone in that building for 8 hours. I would have heard 60 frames coming down and going back up. I would have heard something. I called the agency that morning and told them I thought someone had a second set of keys. They said that was impossible. The locks hadn't been changed in years, and it was probably vandalism from before my shift started. I didn't believe them. I don't think they believed themselves. Night 22. This is the one I still see when I close my eyes. I was doing my second pass through the East Gallery, where they kept the tall, gilded mirrors the shipping family had imported from somewhere in Italy, floor to ceiling, framed in gold leaf that had gone dull with age. I always hated that gallery. Too many reflections, not enough light. I caught myself in one of them out of habit. You do that. You check your own face when you're tired, just to make sure you still look like you. I raised my hand to push my hair back. The reflection raised its hand half a second after I did. I want to be precise about this because I've replayed it in my head so many times the memory's worn smooth like a stone. It wasn't a delay in the whole reflection. The room behind me moved in sync, the dust sheets, the light from my torch, all of it perfectly matched, real time. It was just my reflection's arm. A hitch, a stutter, like watching a video call freeze for one frame and catch back up. I didn't scream. I want that on record. I just backed out of that gallery so fast I clipped my shoulder on the door frame, and I didn't go back in there again unless I absolutely had to. And when I did, I didn't look at the mirrors. Not once. I should have quit then. I think about that a lot. The version of me that clocks out that night, drives home, calls the agency, and never goes back. I don't know why that isn't what happened. I think, honestly, it's because by that point I needed to know. The dread had turned into something closer to obsession. I started reading up on the hall's history on my breaks, digging through whatever digitized archive records the local historical society had online. I told myself I was looking for a rational explanation. I don't think that's actually what I was looking for. Night 26, I was in the old study, one of the smaller rooms, tucked behind the library, with a heavy oak writing desk that the inventory listed as original to the house, built sometime around 1824. I'd walked past that desk 24 times without a second thought. That night, for no reason I can explain, I crouched down to check underneath it. Maybe I heard something. Maybe I just needed to be doing something with my hands. Carved into the underside of the desk, in old, careful handwriting pressed deep into 200-year-old wood, was my name. Not a similar name. Not initials. My full name, first and last. The exact one on my agency ID badge. The exact one my mother gave me. Carved by hand into a piece of furniture that had been sealed inside that room since before my great-great-grandparents were born. I sat on the floor of that study for what felt like an hour. I didn't touch it again. I didn't tell the agency. What was I supposed to say? I photographed it on my phone, and I still have the photo, and I still don't look at it more than I have to. I couldn't let it go after that. I spent my next few days off at the local records office instead of sleeping, going through everything I could find on the hall's last private owner, the man who'd sold it to the historical trust back in the 70s before it became a museum. Deeds, census records, one old newspaper clipping from a charity gala, badly scanned, black and white, grainy. The photograph showed him standing on the front steps of Ashcombe Hall in what would have been 1968. It was my face, not a resemblance. Not if you squint. The same jaw, the same slight asymmetry in the eyebrows I'd been self-conscious about my whole life. The same crooked smile I have in literally every photo of myself since childhood. According to the caption, the man's name wasn't mine. Different name entirely. But the newspaper had gotten the date of his birth wrong in a way that only made sense if you did the math backwards from my birthday, 40-some years early. I don't have an explanation for that. I've never asked anyone in my family about it, because I'm not sure I want an answer that makes this make sense. I kept working the job. I know how that sounds. But the money was money, and by then I think some part of me had convinced myself that whatever was happening in that building had already decided about me, and leaving wouldn't undo it. It would just mean I never found out how it ended. I don't work the day rotation anymore. I don't work weekends. I never see the agency in person. Everything's over the phone now, and honestly, they never ask about the portraits, or the mirror, or the desk. Maybe they know. Maybe they've had guards before me who found their own names carved into old furniture. Maybe that's the whole point of the job. I still do my 2 rounds a night. I still check the throne room at 3:13. I still avoid the mirrors in the East Gallery, and I've stopped straightening the portraits at all, because at some point I realized they're not being moved at random. They're being sorted. Every week, a little more. I think, eventually, there's a wall in that building meant for me. I still work there. I just don't clock out anymore. I don't think the building lets me. Before you watch this clip, check the viewer count in the corner of your screen right now. Because on the night I'm about to tell you about, our said one viewer was already watching 3 minutes before we ever pressed go live. I run a small Urbex channel. Nothing huge, maybe 40,000 subscribers, the kind of channel where you know a good chunk of your regulars by their usernames. Me and my friend Deja had been doing this together for about 2 years. Hospitals, malls, one genuinely terrifying half-built subdivision outside Toledo. We were careful. We researched locations. We never posted addresses live. We always had an exit planned. That part matters, because it's the part that makes what happened afterwards so hard to explain away as us being reckless idiots. The location that night was Redfern Elementary, a public school on the edge of town that had been shut down in 2009 after a district consolidation and just never demolished. Sat there behind a chain-link fence for 15 years, slowly rotting. One of those places local teenagers dare each other to go into, and almost none of them actually do. We went in around 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, camera rolling, stream chat already lit up with the usual mix of hype and jokes. Normal Urbex energy. Nothing felt wrong yet. That's important. I want you to understand that for the first 20 minutes, this was just a regular stream. Peeling linoleum. A hallway of lockers with faded construction paper, name tags, still taped above some of them. The smell of mildew and something faintly sweet underneath it, like old pencil shavings gone soft with damp. The first sign something was off wasn't anything we noticed ourselves. It was chat. About 25 minutes in, while Deja was panning her camera down a classroom hallway, the chat exploded, not with the usual fire spam, but with actual concern. Who's that kid behind you? There's a kid in the hallway right there. Guys, turn around. We turned around. Nothing. Empty hallway, lockers, a drinking fountain rusted solid. I remember laughing it off on stream, said something like, maybe you're seeing shadows, chat, and moved on. But the comments kept coming. Not from one troll spamming the same message, from a dozen different usernames, independently, all describing the same thing. A small figure, standing just behind Deja's left shoulder, gone the second the camera swung around to look. Some of them said it was wearing what looked like an old-style school uniform. One person said, and I remember this one specifically because it made the hair on my arms stand up, it's not moving, it's just watching her film. We kept walking. I told myself chat was messing with us. I really did believe that, for a while. I want to be really clear about the layout here, because it matters. Redfern's PA system was original to the building. 1970s hardware. The kind with a handset in the front office you'd press a button on to make announcements to individual classrooms. The building had been without power for over a decade. We checked. There was no electricity running to that school. We were filming entirely on flashlights and camera-mounted lights. At 10:52 p.m., a soft static crackle came through speakers mounted in the hallway ceiling, followed by a woman's voice, flat, bored, exactly the cadence of a teacher taking morning attendance. She called 4 names. 2 of them were characters we occasionally joked about on stream, inside references from old videos. Chat didn't think much of those. But the 3rd and 4th names she called were Deja's full legal name and mine. First, middle, and last. Names we had never used on the channel. Not once. Not in 2 years of streaming under our handles. Chat's messages during that 30 seconds are still archived. I've read them probably 100 times. Nobody was joking anymore. It was just message after message asking if we were okay, telling us to leave right now. We didn't leave. I don't know why. I think some part of both of us needed to understand what was happening more than we were scared of it. Which, looking back, might be the single dumbest sentence I've ever said out loud about my own life. If the idea of a dead building calling out your real name, a name you never gave it, sends a chill down your spine, you already know what to do before this video's over. If you've ever hosted a live stream and had chat suddenly go quiet, all at once, mid-sentence, across hundreds of viewers with no explanation, I need you to know that's exactly what happened to us next, and it is one of the worst feelings I have ever experienced watching a screen. We'd walked into what used to be a 2nd grade classroom. Rows of tiny chairs, a chalkboard still standing at the front, covered in a thick film of dust. Deja swept her flashlight across it out of habit, more documentary instinct than anything else. And then chat wasn't quiet anymore. It was screaming, spam warning, dozens of messages a second, all variations of the same 3 words. Look up, look up, look up. We looked at the chalkboard first, because that's where the camera was pointed, and in the dust, in handwriting too small and too careful to have been there 30 seconds earlier, were 2 words, look up. We looked up. There was something on the ceiling tile directly above Deja's head. I'm not going to describe it in detail because I genuinely don't have the vocabulary for it, and I don't want to invent one. But it was pressed flat against the tile, the way a hand presses flat against glass, and it was gone by the time either of our flashlights actually settled on the spot. We left the building at that point. Ran, actually, straight out the front doors we'd propped open, out into the parking lot, into Deja's car, doors locked, engine running before either of us said a word. Chat was still going wild in the corner of the phone mounted on the dashboard, still streaming, and for a minute, just a minute, sitting there with the engine running and the doors locked and the school shrinking in the rearview mirror, I actually felt safe. I said something to the camera like, okay, that's it. That's the scariest thing that's ever happened to us. Stream's over. And I remember genuinely believing it was over. It wasn't. When we got home and I pulled the VOD to clip highlights for the community post, I found the part that actually keeps me up now, more than the chalkboard, more than the PA system. There's a stretch of footage, about 6 minutes, where Deja had stepped outside to grab a fresh battery from the car, and I was alone in the front office, camera still rolling, narrating to chat by myself. In the background of that footage, in the doorway behind me, slightly out of focus, is a small figure, standing still, and its mouth is moving, not talking to me, not reacting to anything I said, just mouthing the same 3 or 4 words, over and over, silently, the entire 6 minutes, like a loop. I've had 3 different people try to lip read it for me in the comments of the clip. I'm not going to tell you what they think it says, because I don't actually know if they're right, and some things I'd rather not confirm. Here's the detail that made me stop sleeping properly for about 2 weeks. I went back into our streaming platform's backend a few days later, mostly to pull viewer analytics for a sponsor report, completely unrelated to any of this. Out of habit, I checked the session log for that specific stream. the exact second-by-second viewer join data the platform keeps on file. Every stream we've ever done starts the same way. Viewer count at 0 until we hit go live, then it ticks up as people join. That night's log showed something different. The viewer count for that session started at 1. A single anonymous viewer, no username, no account history, logged as present in the stream 3 minutes before we ever pressed the button to start it. I contacted the platform support about it, thinking it had to be a back-end bug. They looked into it and told me, and I'm quoting the email because I saved it, that no viewer session data exists prior to stream initialization. This would not be technically possible under our system. Case number SR 88213, if you want to look it up yourself. It's still open. Nobody's ever explained it to me. Has anyone else ever checked their old stream analytics and found a viewer who was there before you even went live? I need to know I'm not the only one this has happened to. Tell me below. The viewer count read 3 minutes before we pressed go live, and support told us that shouldn't technically be possible. We never streamed there again, but someone's still watching from that account, waiting for the next go live button. Taken one of my tours, and I mean any tour, any year, I need you to go pull up the photos right now. Not later. Now. I need you to look very closely at my face and tell me if, in a single one of them, I'm blinking. I worked at Wrenhurst Manor for 3 years, give or take, and I want to be upfront that I don't actually know the give or take part anymore, which should tell you where this is going. Wrenhurst started life as a private residence for a minor branch of English nobility in the 1870s, the kind of place with a ballroom nobody could afford to heat, and a marble staircase built for guests who never showed up in the numbers the family expected. By 1911, the family had lost most of their money, and the property was sold to the county, converted into what the old records politely call a convalescent hospital for nervous conditions. Everyone who worked there, myself included, just called it what it was, an asylum, dressed up in a palace's clothes. It closed for good in the 60s, sat empty for decades. Eventually, a private company bought it, patched the roof, put in gift shop lighting, and turned it into a tourist attraction, the kind of place where you buy a $22 ticket to walk through old wards and hear about lobotomies while standing under a chandelier that cost more than most people's houses. I got hired as a tour guide in my late 20s. Ordinary job, ordinary reasons. I needed the money, and I liked history, and I told myself the creepy stuff was just good marketing. The smell was the first thing. You'd expect an old building to smell like dust and mildew, and it did, mostly, except in 3 specific rooms that had never, according to any historical record I could find, been used for medical purposes. The old music room, a upstairs sitting room, and a linen closet off the east corridor that was barely big enough to stand in. All 3 smelled like antiseptic. Sharp, clean, faintly sweet. The exact smell of the hospital ward 2 floors below, except those 3 rooms had never held a single patient bed in over 100 years of recorded use. I mentioned it to my manager once. He just said, "Yeah, people say that," and changed the subject so fast I didn't bring it up again. That should have been my first real warning. Not the smell itself, the way nobody wanted to talk about it. The cold spots came next, a few months into the job. Old buildings have cold spots, sure, drafts and bad insulation, I know that. But these ones moved. Not randomly, they moved with me. I'd feel a patch of freezing air pass over my shoulder in the ballroom, walk into the next room, and there it'd be again, waiting by the door, like it had taken a shortcut I didn't know about. I kept working there because, honestly, the pay was decent and I convinced myself I was imagining things. That's the part one thing people don't understand from the outside, how easy it is to talk yourself back down. You tell yourself it's the job getting to you. Too many ghost stories in the script, too many guests asking, "Is this place really haunted?" until you start seeing what they want you to see. I believed that for almost 2 years. Then the photos started. Guests would email the gift shop asking who the other guide was. The one in the old-fashioned nurse's uniform, gray dress, white pinafore, the exact style Reinhurst's medical staff wore in photographs from the 1930s, standing in the background of their tour photos. Sometimes at the edge of a hallway. Once, unmistakably, standing directly behind a guest in the old day room, close enough that her hand looked like it was resting on the woman's shoulder. We didn't have any staff dressed like that. Never had. Our uniforms were modern, polos with the company logo, name tags, the whole deal. I asked to see one of the photos myself. The manager showed me, reluctant, like he already regretted it. The extra guide was facing away from the camera in most of them. In the one where she was angled toward it, her face was blurred in a way that didn't match the rest of the photo. Not motion blur, not a focus issue, just a smooth, deliberate-looking smear where a face should be. If the idea of a stranger's hand resting on your shoulder in a photo you don't remember being taken sends a chill down your spine, you already know what to do before this video's over. The County Historical Society let researchers access the original patient ledgers, kept in a locked archive room in the basement, and one slow afternoon I asked to look through them out of curiosity, partly professional interest, partly because I couldn't stop thinking about the antiseptic smell in rooms that were never wards. I found my name, not a similar name, my full legal name, first and last, in the same looping cursive as every other entry, in a ledger dated 1958. Admission date, my birthday. Not the year, obviously. I wasn't born for another 3 decades, but the exact month and day, listed as clearly as any other patient's, next to a diagnosis column that had been left blank. I photographed the page with my phone. When I went back the following week to look again, the archive staff told me that ledger had been sent out for restoration and wouldn't be available for months. I checked the restoration company's public records later. They had no record of ever receiving it. I almost quit after that. I want you to know I almost did the smart thing. I had my letter of resignation half written in my email drafts for weeks. But something about actually leaving felt, and I know how this sounds, harder than staying. Like the building had some kind of pull that got stronger the longer you worked inside it, not weaker. If you've ever worked somewhere that felt like it didn't want you to leave, I need you to understand that I'm not being poetic when I say that. I mean it happened to me literally. Every time I tried to plan an exit, something happened that same week that made leaving feel impossible. A scheduling emergency, a family thing back home falling through, some reason that always felt reasonable in the moment and, looking back, felt engineered. The last straw was the recitation. I did the tour script from memory. Every guide does. Eventually, you say the same 40-minute speech hundreds of times until it's muscle memory. One evening, after the last tour group had left and I was locking up the East Wing alone, I heard my own voice reciting my own script, word for word, from behind the locked door of the old isolation ward. Not a recording. My actual voice, the real-time cadence I use, the little pause I always take before the line about the fire in 1943, the exact way I say, "If you'll follow me," like I'm asking a favor instead of giving an instruction. I stood outside that locked door for almost 10 minutes, listening to myself give a tour to no one, in a room nobody was allowed inside. Here's the part one still can't explain, and it's the reason I'm making this instead of just quietly disappearing the way I planned to. I finally did quit. I have the resignation email, timestamped, dated almost 3 years ago now. I have a text from my old manager confirming my last day. By every account that exists on paper, I stopped working at Renhurst Manor in the fall of that year. Last month, an old coworker reached out asking if I still wanted my final paycheck stub for tax purposes, because the accounting software still had me listed as active. I laughed it off. Payroll glitches happen, until she sent me the actual printout. According to the timesheet system, I have clocked in every single working day for the past 3 years. Same badge number, same login, 9 a.m. to close, 5 days a week, without a single missed shift. without a single sick day, for a job I have not physically shown up to since the week I quit. I called the front desk to ask who'd been using my login. The woman who answered paused for a long time before she said, quietly, "You have. You're actually here right now, aren't you? I can see you on the camera in the East Corridor." I was sitting in my apartment, 40 minutes away, when she said that. Has your workplace ever kept records of you being somewhere you know for a fact you weren't? I need to know I'm not the only one this has happened to. Tell me below. The front desk said she could see me on the security camera, standing in the East Corridor, while I was sitting in my apartment, 40 minutes away. If you've been on one of my tours, I need you to check something. Not the smell, not the cold spots, not even the woman in the nurse's uniform. I need you to look at my face in the photo and tell me, did I ever actually blink? Calls you about an inheritance from a relative you've never heard of, ask them one question before you say yes to anything. Ask them why the property records list your family as extinct. I'm an ordinary guy. I want to say that up front, because everything after this point is going to sound like I'm exaggerating for effect, and I promise you I'm not. I worked in logistics outside Cleveland. I had a mortgage, a dog, a fairly boring life I was mostly content with. Then, in March, I got a call from a law firm in a small Central European country I'm not going to name specifically, informing me that a woman named Ilka Varga, my supposed great-great-aunt, 3 generations removed, someone I had never once heard mentioned in my entire life, had passed away and left me her entire estate. The estate turned out to be a palace. An actual palace, built in the 1700s by minor nobility, tucked into the hills outside a village so small it barely shows up on modern maps. My family, according to the paperwork, had owned it continuously for 200 years before quietly losing contact with the American branch. My branch, sometime around the First World War. I flew out 3 weeks later, mostly out of curiosity and a little out of the fantasy every broke American has about inheriting a castle. The lawyer met me at the airport, a tired, careful man named Dobrescu who spoke excellent English and avoided eye contact in a way I clocked immediately and dismissed immediately, which I now recognize as the first of many mistakes. The village itself was lovely in a postcard sort of way. Cobblestone, a church with a crooked spire, older women who stared at me from doorways without waving back. I assumed it was just small-town suspicion of an outsider. I didn't think much of it until I asked the woman running the one grocery store for directions up to the palace, and she went completely still, put down what she was holding, and told me, in halting English, that she wouldn't say the building's name out loud. Not that she didn't know it, that she wouldn't say it. I laughed it off in the moment. I actually laughed, standing in that little shop, because it felt like something out of a movie, too on the nose to be real. She didn't laugh back. She just quietly rang up my bottled water and wouldn't meet my eyes again until I left. The palace itself, when I finally reached it, was staggering. 3 stories of pale stone gone gray with age, a wrought iron gate rusted half open, ivy consuming the west wing almost entirely. Dobrescu handed me the keys at the gate and did not come inside with me. He said the caretaker had quit 2 months earlier and never explained why, and that he had other business to attend to, and left before I'd even gotten the front door open. I was alone in a 200-year-old palace in a country where I didn't speak the language, and it was, for the first hour or two, actually kind of wonderful. Dusty, echoing, beautiful in that sad, forgotten way old places are. That feeling didn't last. Up in the attic, I found a trunk of old photographs, sepia, brittle at the edges, the kind of formal portraits families used to take once a decade if they were lucky. Room by room, I recognized the palace's interior exactly as it had looked 100 years earlier. The same chandeliers, the same heavy oak furniture, positioned in the photographs in specific, deliberate arrangements. A settee angled just so beneath a window. A writing desk pushed against the north wall of the study. Downstairs, none of the rooms matched those photos. Furniture was scattered the way any abandoned house accumulates disorder over decades. Chairs pushed wherever, tables shoved into corners. On my third morning, I came downstairs to find the study rearranged. Exactly, precisely, to match the 100-year-old photograph I'd left sitting open on the desk the night before. The writing desk against the north wall. The chair angled at the same 45 degrees. I hadn't moved a single piece of furniture. I was the only living person in that building. I told myself I'd sleepwalked. I actually convinced myself of that for almost 2 full days, which tells you something about how badly a person wants an explanation that doesn't break their understanding of the world. If the thought of your own house rearranging itself to match a photo you didn't even know existed sends a chill down your spine, you already know what to do before this video ends. There was a music box in the nursery, small, wooden, the kind of thing you'd expect a child to have owned 200 years ago. I found it half buried under a dust sheet, wound it out of idle curiosity, and it played a lullaby, slow, minor key, unmistakably foreign, a melody I had absolutely never heard in my life. I hummed along with it without thinking, word for word. If a lullaby can have words I didn't understand and somehow still sang correctly. I only realized what I was doing about 30 seconds in, and when I did, I stopped so abruptly I nearly dropped the box. I don't speak a single word of the language of that country. I checked, later, using a translation app pointed at a recording I made of myself humming it. Asked a local woman at a cafe to write down what I'd sung. She looked at the words for a long moment, then looked at me and asked, very carefully, where I had learned a morning song that, according to her, hadn't been sung in that village since before her grandmother was a girl. If you ever inherit a house full of covered mirrors, I need you to listen to me. Leave them covered. I mean that as seriously as I've ever meant anything. Every mirror in that palace, and there were dozens, ornate gilded things in nearly every room, had been draped in heavy black cloth, tied at the base, clearly done deliberately and clearly done a very long time ago, the fabric gone stiff and gray with dust. I asked Debrescu about it over the phone. He went quiet for a moment and then told me, flatly, that it was tradition and that I should not disturb them, and then changed the subject so fast it was almost rude. I uncovered one anyway. A tall, gilt-framed mirror in the drawing room, the cloth crumbling to pieces in my hands as I pulled it free. The room reflected back at me was almost right. Almost. The same furniture, the same dust, the same gray afternoon light through the same tall windows. Except in the mirror, the high-back chair by the fireplace. Empty in the actual room. I checked. I was standing right next to it. Had someone sitting in it. A shape, indistinct, facing away from the reflected version of me, perfectly still. I turned around. The chair beside me, in the real room, was empty. I covered that mirror again within about 10 seconds, hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to tie the cloth back the way it had been. I want to tell you about the portrait because it's the last thing that happened before I left, and it's the thing I still can't fully sit with. There was a formal portrait in the main hall of a woman in 19th century dress, labeled with a small brass plate that read simply V. Presumably an ancestor, maybe even Ilka Varga's grandmother. I never found out for certain. On my last night in the palace, I walked past it with a candle. The power flickered constantly out there, so candles were a practical necessity, not an aesthetic choice, and noticed the paint around the woman's eyes looked wet. Not cracked with age the way old oil paint does. Wet, glistening in the candlelight, a dark, viscous sheen pooled faintly at the lower lash line of a painting that had to be at least 150 years old. I didn't touch it. I photographed it, hands shaking, and left the palace that same night, driving to the nearest town with a hotel, sleeping with every light on. The next morning, before flying home, I went to the county records office out of some desperate need to understand what I'd actually inherited. A clerk there, after some searching, told me something that made the floor feel like it had dropped out from under me. Officially, on paper, In every registry the government maintained, the Varga family line had gone legally extinct in 1911. No births, no marriages, no descendants recorded for over a century. Which means, according to every document that exists, I don't legally exist. Neither, technically, should the inheritance I was given. Neither, technically, should the palace I stood inside of for 4 nights. Has anyone else ever found out an official record says your family ended generations before you were supposedly born? I need to know I'm not imagining how impossible that sounds. Tell me below. The county clerk told me my family line had been legally extinct since 1911, 100 years before I was born into it. Before I left the village for good, 3 of the older women who'd avoided me all week finally approached me at the edge of the square. They didn't ask my name. They didn't ask about the lawyer, or the will, or the palace. They just asked me, very quietly, which one of us I was.